Hey guys, it's Miseducation Monday on Saturday because it's really important that we talk about 4th of July. Most of you aren't going to be able to celebrate this year anyways because of the pandemic. Maybe that's an incredibly wonderful, happy accident. Maybe it's universal fate. Maybe it is just about time that we really start questioning what it is we're celebrating in the first place. Let's break it down. The big thing is fireworks, right? Well, let's think about where fireworks came from. The people of China have used fireworks for a very long time. They originated around 2,000 years ago because a monk decided he was going to put together bamboo and gunpowder and throw it up into the air, and he created a firecracker. Now, how did we get them here in America? Well, the Italians brought them over. The Italians thought the firecrackers were so fun that they wanted to bring them to America. Okay, fireworks aren't bad. They don't even necessarily mean war or victory, which is what I thought originally when I was looking this up. There was one year I decided to go up to my rooftop a couple of years ago, and I happened to notice fireworks all across the land, and I realized for the first time that they looked like bombs. It looked like cities all across the county were being bombed and airplanes flying overhead. It was really eerie, that 4th of July. And I've never really been able to think about it the same way since. But especially this year, I encourage you to consider that this is a symbol of war. It is a symbol of racism. Not fireworks themselves, but the actual celebration of Independence Day. Who was the first person to decide to celebrate Independence Day with fireworks? It was John Adams, our very first vice president. He thought that this beautiful country should be celebrated with color, lights, pop, and sound, and pomp and circumstance. And so that's what it became. If you take a look at John Adams, he didn't own enslaved persons. However, he did still hire white men and free African American men to work on his land. And his wife, Abigail Adams, is known to have called these people blacks or creatures. Now, to her credit, in 1776, she often criticized Virginians for their celebrating of liberty when they clearly deprived their creatures of it. I appreciate that she did try to call them out on their bullshit. However, they are classic examples of white silence is violence. And while Abigail tried her best to have people hired in the house that were white, she actually called them drunk. She ended up hiring a few enslaved people later on in their lifetime. And while they were not enslaved by her and John, they were borrowed enslaved persons from their peers, namely George Washington. I encourage you guys to consider that 4th of July doesn't have to be celebrated just because that's what you've always done. What if you reimagined this day? If you took the time to think about our fellow Black, Indigenous people of color, our friends in our community that are not free? What if you took the time to honor them in some way today? This day surrounds celebration of the Emancipation Proclamation, the Constitution written in our honor for freedom and justice for all. But it was written by white men who owned enslaved people. This Constitution is based in a lie. If you really consider members of the Black Indigenous community a friend of yours, how do you think it makes them feel when you take a day to shout loudly at the rooftops, "Land of the free," when it's a lie? I just want to comment on the day. If you are not going out in celebration today because of COVID and pandemic, great. Thank you for being safe. Thank you for being smart. But if you are still somehow honoring this day, using the offers, the discounts, the coupons, the codes in honor of independence, if you say that you are friends of the Black and Indigenous community, you're being a hypocrite. It was never land of the free. It never has been, and it still isn't. Let's talk about Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass was born in slavery in 1818. His mother was of Native American ancestry, and his father was of African and European descent. His full name at birth was Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey. He was separated from his mother as an infant, so he lived for a time with his grandmother, Betty Bailey. However, at the age of 6, he was moved away from her to live and work on the Wye House plantation in Maryland. Douglass was given to Lucretia Auld. He was given as a child to a white woman, and her husband Thomas sent Douglass to work with Thomas's brother Hugh in Baltimore. Douglass credits Hugh's wife Sophia as being the first one to teach him the letters of the alphabet. From there, he taught himself to read and write. By the time he was hired to work out under William Freeland, he had taught other enslaved persons how to read by using the Bible. Word spread of his efforts to educate fellow enslaved persons. Thomas Auld took him back and then transferred him to a man named Edward Covey, who was known for his brutal treatment of enslaved persons. Douglass was only 16 by this time, and he was regularly whipped by Covey. Douglass finally left Covey's farm in 1838. He hopped the train to Maryland, he went through Delaware, which was another enslaved state, and he landed in New York at a safe house of abolitionist David Ruggles. Once he settled in New York, he sent for Anna Murray, a free black woman whom he'd met while he spent time with the Aulds. She joined him and married him in September 1838. They had 5 children together. After their marriage, the young couple moved to Massachusetts, where they met Nathan and Mary Johnson. And it was the Johnsons who inspired them to change their name to Douglass, after the character in the Sir Walter Scott poem, The Lady of the Lake. Douglass began attending meetings of the abolitionist movement, and he was exposed to these writings of an abolitionist journalist named William Lloyd Garrison. These 2 men met up, and Douglass shared his story of slavery and escape. And it was William Lloyd Garrison who encouraged Douglass to become a speaker in the abolitionist movement. 2 years later, Douglass published one of his most famous autobiographies, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave. In it, he wrote, "In the darkest hours of my career in slavery, this living word of faith and spirit of hope departed not from me, but remained like ministering angels to cheer me through the gloom." He published his own abolitionist newsletter called The North Star, and quickly soon after, he became an avid activist in the women's rights movement. The newsletter's name was changed to Frederick Douglass's Newspaper in 1851. It included coverage of women's rights movements on the cover of North Star. And it was published until 1860, right before the Civil War. Now in 1852, we get to one of his most famous speeches, where he talks about the significance of 4th of July to an enslaved person. In one section of the speech, Douglass notes, "What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days in the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless, your denunciations of tyrants brass-fronted impudence, your shouts of liberty and equality hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all your religious parade and solemnity, are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy. A thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of the United States at this very hour." For the 24th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation in 1886, Douglass delivers a rousing address in Washington, D.C., during which he says, "Where justice is denied, where poverty is enforced, where ignorance prevails, and where any one class is made to feel that society is an organized conspiracy to oppress, rob, and degrade them, neither persons nor property will ever be safe." For the remainder of his years, Frederick Douglass continued to fight for enslaved people, continued to speak and work tirelessly for the end of slavery. And he also fought to give the right to newly freed Black Americans the right to vote. Douglass remained an active speaker, writer, and activist until his death in 1895. He died from a heart attack, coming home from a meeting for the National Council of Women, which was in its infancy at the time in Washington, D.C. Thank you, Frederick, for fighting for us. Thank you for fighting for your people. Thank you for fighting on behalf of what is right. If you want to reimagine the 4th of July, I encourage you to think of Frederick Douglass. I encourage you to lift your glass to him. I encourage you to not celebrate the 4th of July, to try something new, which is educating yourself on what it really means to be an American and how much we are not free until we are all free. Guys, just imagine if you weren't free, if you were never free, if you were born an enslaved person and you escaped and found your freedom, and then an entire nation of people celebrated every year why you were enslaved in the first place. Let's reimagine our nation. Let's reimagine this day. Let's love each other. We are not free until we are all free. You don't have to celebrate this day anymore. You can be a part of the movement. I believe in you. You are able.